The last thing I saw before my sister drove away was my mother leaning out the passenger window, laughing so hard she could barely breathe. She waved at me. Actually waved, like I was standing on the curb after a nice visit, not stranded at a truck stop off the Trans-Canada in the middle of November, with no coat, no phone, and $43 in my pocket. I've spent a long time trying to figure out when I became the joke in my own family. I think it was so gradual I just never noticed it happening. My name is Tess, I'm 31 years old, I'm a medical office coordinator in Guelph, Ontario, and up until 18 months ago, I genuinely believed my family was just rough around the edges. That's what I told myself. That's what I told my friends when they asked why my mother's idea of a birthday gift was a backhanded comment about my haircut, or why my sister could cancel plans on me 4 times in a row, and I'd still pick up when she called the 5th time. Rough around the edges. That's all. I was wrong. It started with a road trip, or what my mother framed as a road trip. She called me on a Tuesday evening, which was unusual because my mother usually only called when she needed something, or when she had news she wanted to deliver in a way that required me to be sitting down. This time her voice was light, almost warm. She said she and my sister were driving up to visit my aunt, her younger sister who lives in Thunder Bay, and wouldn't it be nice if I came along? The 3 of us, a proper girls' trip. It had been years since we'd done anything like that together. I should have known better. I did know better, somewhere in the back of my mind, where all the things I refused to look at lived. But the voice on the phone was the version of my mother I'd been chasing my whole life, and I said yes before she even finished asking. We left on a Friday morning. My sister picked me up in her SUV, a big black Chevy Tahoe, that her husband had bought for her, and that she drove with the kind of confidence that comes from never having paid for anything yourself. My mother was already in the front seat. She turned around when I got in and looked me up and down and said, "That's what you're wearing?" I was wearing jeans and a sweater. I had a bag in the trunk. We hadn't even left my street. "Hi, Mom," I said. "Good to see you too." She turned back around and said something to my sister that I wasn't meant to hear. My sister laughed. We pulled out of the driveway. The drive from Guelph to Thunder Bay is roughly 14 hours. That's 14 hours across the top of Lake Superior, through Sudbury and Sault Ste. Marie, past the granite cuts in the boreal forest, and all that Canadian wilderness that looks beautiful in photographs and relentless when you're staring at it from a back seat, feeling slowly invisible. My mother and sister talked the whole way. About my sister's house renovations, about a cousin's recent divorce, about a woman from my mother's church, whose daughter had supposedly married well. I sat in the back and looked out the window, and answered questions when they were directed at me. Which wasn't often. Somewhere past White River, we were about 3 hours outside of Thunder Bay. My mother said she needed a washroom break. My sister pulled off at a transport stop. It wasn't much, just a gas station and a diner attached to a low concrete building. One of those places you find every few hundred kilometers on northern Ontario highways where the parking lot is mostly semis and the coffee is the kind that's been sitting since the morning rush. We all went inside. I used the washroom, bought a coffee, and sat down at a table near the window to wait. My sister said she was going to stretch her legs. My mother said she was going back out to the car to get her cardigan. I watched through the window as my sister walked out to the Tahoe. My mother had already gotten to the passenger side. Then my sister got into the driver's seat, and neither of them got back out. I thought maybe they were waiting for me in the car. I left my coffee on the table and walked outside. The Tahoe was already on the highway. I stood there in the parking lot in jeans and a sweater in November in northern Ontario, and I watched my mother's car get smaller and smaller and then disappear around a curve in the Trans-Canada, and the only sound was the wind off the lake and the low rumble of diesel engines and my own breathing. My first thought, I want you to know, was not anger. It was embarrassment. That's the thing about being the family punching bag for 30 years. Your first instinct isn't to get upset, it's to wonder what you did wrong. I stood there and I actually went back through the last 10 minutes, trying to figure out what I'd missed, what I must have done to make them leave, as if there were a reasonable explanation for what I was watching. Then my phone buzzed. Right. Except it didn't, because my phone was in my bag, and my bag was in the trunk of my sister's SUV, currently doing about 110 kilometers an hour on the Trans-Canada toward Thunder Bay. I had my wallet in my coat pocket, $43 cash and a debit card. I had the coffee I'd left on the table inside. I had my keys to my apartment back in Guelph, which was 9 hours away in the wrong direction, and which I had no way of getting to. I went back inside the diner because I didn't know what else to do. The woman behind the counter was maybe 60, with silver hair, and the kind of face that spent decades being patient with people. She looked at me and must have seen something in my expression, because she came out from behind the counter and said, "Honey, you all right?" I told her what had happened. I told her I'd been left at the side of the highway by my family, and I didn't have my phone, and I didn't know what to do. I expected her to look skeptical. People don't usually believe things like that when you say them out loud, because things like that don't happen. She didn't look skeptical at all. She looked angry on my behalf. She put a fresh coffee in front of me and said, "You sit right there." Her name was Ruth Ann. She'd worked at that diner for 22 years. She called her manager, a soft-spoken man named Boyd, who came out from the back wiping his hands on a dish towel, and listened to my situation with the same quiet seriousness you'd want from someone solving a problem. He said I could use the landline behind the counter to make calls. He said I was welcome to stay as long as I needed. I called my sister's number from memory. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called my mother's number. Same thing. Then my sister called the diner back. I'd left the number on her voicemail. And when Ruth Ann handed me the receiver and I said hello, I could hear them before my sister even spoke. Laughing. Both of them. My mother in the background saying, "Is she actually crying? Oh my God," and then losing it completely, and my sister barely able to get the words out through her own laughter. Tess, it's a prank, we'll turn around. We just wanted to see how you'd react. Don't be so dramatic." A prank. In November, 3 hours from the nearest city my sister could name, with no phone, in weather that Environment Canada had flagged as potentially hazardous by evening. A prank, at 31 years old, to see how I'd react. Ruth Ann was watching me. I think she saw my face change. I handed her back the receiver, and I sat down at the counter and I pressed both hands flat on the formica top, and I looked at the grain in the material and I breathed. "They coming back?" Ruth Ann asked. "They said so." She set a bowl of soup in front of me. Chicken soup, homemade, not the kind from a can. She didn't say anything else. She just let me sit there and be quiet, which was maybe the kindest thing anyone had done for me in a long time. Boyd came back out and sat across from me and we talked, which surprised me. He was from Nipigon originally, had come south to work on the highway crew in his 20s and never quite left. He asked me about my job, about Guelph, about what I did. He talked to me like I was a person whose situation made sense, like I wasn't ridiculous for being upset. After about 20 minutes he said, "You know, you don't have to go with them when they come back." I looked at him. "If you've got a card on you, the bus goes through here twice a day. Next one's in 2 hours, goes to Sudbury. You could figure it out from there." I hadn't thought about that. The idea of not getting back into that SUV, I hadn't even considered it as an option. That's how deep the conditioning goes. You assume you'll get back in the car. You assume you'll be polite about it. You assume the relationship will continue exactly as it was, because the alternative is something you've never been allowed to imagine. I sat with that for a minute. Then I asked Boyd how much the bus ticket cost. It was $62 to Sudbury. I had $43 in cash. I asked if they took debit. The answer was no, it was cash only. The bus company's terminal was old and they hadn't updated it. I was $19 short. I told Boyd I was still 19 short. He didn't hesitate. He opened his wallet and put a 20 on the counter and pushed it toward me. I told him I couldn't take that. He said, "I've got a daughter your age. Take it." I don't know if you've ever had a stranger treat you with more basic human decency than your own family in the same afternoon, but I'll tell you what it does to you. It doesn't make you feel grateful exactly. It makes you feel grief. Real grief, the kind that comes from understanding something you've been avoiding, which is that the way your family treats you is not normal, and it never was, and you don't have to keep accepting it. I left before my mother and sister got back to the parking lot. Ruth Ann walked me out to the road and waited with me. She had a station wagon she offered to drive me in if the bus didn't show. And when the Greyhound pulled in out of the gray November sky exactly 8 minutes late, she hugged me like I was someone she knew, and she said, "You take care of yourself now, not them, you." I got on the bus. I found a seat by the window, and I watched that truck stop disappear behind me, and for the first 20 minutes I just sat with my hands in my lap and tried to decide what I was feeling. It wasn't sadness, not exactly. It was something quieter and more final, like a door closing from the inside. My phone was in Thunder Bay, my bag was in Thunder Bay. All I had was my wallet, Boyd's $20, and the clothes I was wearing. I had to borrow the phone of the woman sitting next to me, a nurse named Deb who was going home after a double shift and who, when I explained why I needed to borrow it, said, "Absolutely not. Are you serious?" Meaning she absolutely could not believe what I was telling her. Not that she wouldn't lend it to me. She lent me the phone for the whole rest of the ride. I called my best friend Kira, who lives in Hamilton. I told her what happened. There was a long pause on her end, and then she said very carefully, "Tess, this is not the first time." She was right. It wasn't the first time. It was just the first time I couldn't explain it away. Kira drove to the Sudbury bus station and picked me up at 11:30 that night. She'd brought a coat, an extra phone charger, and a bag with snacks, because she's been my best friend since we were 14, and she's always been more prepared for the emergencies in my life than I am. We sat in the parking lot of the bus station for an hour just talking. She didn't say "I told you so." She just listened while I said out loud, maybe for the first time with real conviction, that something was wrong, that the way my family treated me wasn't rough edges, that it had a name and a pattern, and it had been going on my whole life, and I was 31 years old, and I was done. I should tell you what happened when my mother finally got through to me. I'd asked Kira to keep my number off for the night. The next morning, I turned it back on and I had 27 texts. A few from my sister, the rest from my mother. The first several were variations of, "It was just a joke, you're so sensitive." Then there was a stretch where they seemed to be genuinely concerned about where I'd gone, because they'd come back to the diner and I wasn't there. Then the tone shifted again, into something harder, how I'd ruined the trip, how I'd embarrassed them at my aunt's by not showing up, how my aunt had been worried sick, how I always had to make everything about myself. That last one almost got me. That's the thing about this kind of family. They're very good at the reversal. They leave you at the side of the highway and somehow, 48 hours later, you're the one who owes an apology. I read every single text. Then I put my phone face down on Kira's kitchen table, and I went and took a shower, and I thought about what I actually wanted. I called my mother back 2 days later. I'd had time to think through what I needed to say. I wasn't interested in screaming at her or relitigating every slight from my childhood. I just wanted to tell her, clearly, what I expected going forward. She picked up on the second ring. She immediately said, "So are you done with your tantrum?" And that was it. That was the moment I understood. There was nothing to negotiate. I said, "Mom, I need you to listen to me for 1 minute." She said she was listening. I said, "What you did at that rest stop was dangerous. It wasn't a prank. I was alone in Northern Ontario in November with no phone and no way to reach anyone. I could have been seriously hurt. I need you to understand that what you did was wrong, and I need you to actually say so." There was a pause. Then she laughed. Not the same laugh as through the window of the SUV. This one was short and sharp, the kind that's designed to make the other person feel small. She said, "I can't believe you're still going on about this. We came back, didn't we? You're so determined to be a victim," I said. "I'm not doing this." She started to say something else. I hung up. I've thought about that phone call a lot since then. I've thought about how many times over the years I stayed on the line, waiting for it to turn into something different. How many times I've heard something cruel and told myself I'd misunderstood. How many times I drove 9 hours to sit in my mother's kitchen and feel like a guest who wasn't quite welcome and tell myself that was just how she showed love. I didn't call back. I texted my sister once. A few weeks later, I told her I loved her and I wasn't interested in a relationship that required me to be the butt of every joke. She read it and didn't respond. That was 7 months ago. She still hasn't responded. I've had to sit with a lot of feelings about that. The grief is real. I want to be clear about that. Walking away from family isn't some triumphant moment where you suddenly feel free. It's quiet and it's sad, and it's strange to have holidays go by without the rituals you've had your whole life, even the ones that were never quite right. My first Christmas without calling my mother was the hardest day of the year. I sat in Kira's living room with her family and ate dinner and watched her kids open presents, and I smiled at all the right moments, and then I went to the bathroom and cried for about 4 minutes, and then I came back out. But here's the thing I keep coming back to. Ruth Ann didn't know me. Boyd didn't know me. Deb on the bus didn't know me. And every single one of them, within 10 minutes of meeting me, treated me with more care and more basic human respect than my mother or my sister have shown me in 31 years. That's not nothing. That's actually everything. Because if strangers can see that you're worth helping, worth sitting with, worth putting a bowl of soup in front of, then the problem was never you. The problem was never that you were too sensitive or too dramatic, or too whatever word they used to keep you small. The problem was that the people who were supposed to love you had decided, a long time ago, that you were there for their entertainment. And you'd believed them. I didn't believe them anymore. In the months since, I've been in therapy. My therapist is a woman named Dr. Okafor who has a calming presence and the ability to say, "And how did that make you feel?" without it sounding like a cliché, which I respect. She has helped me understand a lot of things I already knew but couldn't quite hold, that the laughter wasn't affection. That being left at the side of the road wasn't an accident of poor judgment. It was a demonstration of exactly how much I mattered to them. That the reversal, the way the victim always ends up apologizing in my family, is a pattern with a name, and I didn't invent it, and I don't have to keep participating in it. I've also done something I didn't expect to do, which is rebuild. I have Kira, who I've had since I was 14, and who I should have leaned on more over the years instead of keeping my family's stuff compartmentalized like a problem I was embarrassed about. I have 2 colleagues at work who've become genuine friends, women I have dinner with on Thursdays, and who text me memes about medical billing software and who feel, surprisingly, like people who are on my side. I joined a pottery class in September, which sounds small, but it's the first hobby I've taken up in years that has nothing to do with family obligations or trying to make someone else comfortable. I got my bag back, eventually. My aunt, my mother's sister, mailed it to me. She included a note that said she was sorry about what happened and that she hoped I was all right. It was only 6 sentences, but it was the only acknowledgement I received from anyone in my mother's family that what had been done to me was wrong. I've read it several times. I kept Boyd's $20 for a long time. I know that sounds strange. I had it folded up in the small pocket of my wallet for months, even after I could easily have sent it back. I think I kept it because it reminded me that the worst afternoon of my life was also the afternoon I finally understood that I deserved better. It was evidence. Not of the cruelty. I didn't need help remembering that, but of the kindness. Of the fact that there were people in the world who would put a bowl of soup in front of a stranger without making her earn it first. I mailed it back to the diner eventually, with a card explaining who I was and thanking Boyd and Ruth Ann. A few weeks later, Ruth Ann sent me a response. She said they'd put it in the tip jar and split it at the end of the shift, which made me smile so hard I had to put the card down. I don't know what my mother tells people about what happened. I genuinely don't. I'd spent so many years managing her version of events, doing the mental labor of imagining how she'd narrate things to her friends at church, trying to get ahead of it. I don't do that anymore. What she says about me is outside my jurisdiction. It always was. I just thought I could control it if I was good enough, compliant enough, patient enough. I wasn't wrong to love my mother. I wasn't wrong to want a relationship with my sister. Being someone who keeps trying isn't a character flaw. What I was wrong about was the belief that if I just tried hard enough, and was patient enough, and swallowed enough of myself, eventually the relationship would become what I needed it to be. It wasn't going to. It never was. That truck stop off the Trans-Canada is still there, I assume. There are probably people pulling in right now for coffee and a washroom break. People on ordinary drives, who will get back in their cars and continue on to wherever they're going. The diner is probably exactly the same. The Formica counter, the old menu board, Ruth Ann refilling coffees and making change with the efficiency of someone who's done it 1,000 times. For most people who stop there, it's just a stop. For me, it's the place where something finally broke open. Not me, but the story I'd been telling myself. The one where I just hadn't figured out yet how to make my family love me right. The one where there was still something I could do. I stood in that parking lot and I watched them drive away and I finally understood. There was nothing left to figure out. I had already done everything I could do. The answer was just no. And so I walked back inside, and I sat down at that counter, and I let a stranger put soup in front of me, and I started deciding what came next. That's the part they didn't bet on. Not whether I'd make it back, but whether, once I realized I could go anywhere, I'd choose to come back to them at all. I didn't.